I went on a family holiday with my dad, mom, and brother to Tasmania, which is kind of like a big island to the south of Australia. I wasn't terribly interested in the trip, just wanted to spend time with my family, so I left all the bookings to my dad. He has his own Airbnb he manages, so I thought he would be able to find decent places on his own. When we rocked up to the Airbnb my dad booked, the first thought I had was if I wanted to sell drugs, I would do it here. My mom wasn't impressed at all and was already telling my dad off for booking it. I didn't say anything that maybe the inside would be nicer. It was a dingy little house. The paint was peeling, roof was rusty, and there were plants overgrown to the side of the building. Imagine it's grown into the actual foundation and wooden planks. There were 3 entrances. The first one I worked out was the entrance for the host. It looked okay, not as bad as our entrance. It went downstairs, so we figured out after a while the host most likely lived below us. The second looked like it was the main entrance to the house, but it was sealed shut. The door looked like it would break down if anyone was to even push on it slightly and was obviously unused. The third was ours. Aside from the overgrown plants, it was fairly normal. From the looks of it, we figured out later that it looks like the host has divided the house up somehow. She lives below, we live upstairs, but there was one half of the house upstairs that wasn't accounted for. Hard to explain, but the space we occupied only accounted for half the house, and it only went up to the main entrance I spoke of, which is in the middle of the house. We checked in, just grabbed the keys. The host has never contacted us at this point. All was well on the inside. It looked a little old, but wasn't creepy from the get-go. I did notice some odd things. I only mentioned this to my dad. There were a bunch of antique instruments displayed at the entrance, and right on top of one of the pianos were 3 things that looked like urns. Now to explain, I am of Chinese descent. These urns freak me out. Some people think they're for displaying, but we use it to store dead people's ashes. So I really didn't like them being there. I told my dad and he didn't like it either, but he went and tapped the urn to see if there was something in it. He couldn't tell though. But he mentioned that the one he tapped was definitely ones we use for ashes. It had scripts on it for like safe passage to the heavens, from what I could make out. After I stopped freaking out, I went and picked first dibs on the biggest room as per my usual, but then noticed there were heaps of mirrors around the room. Again, another thing, not sure if it's a Chinese thing, but we don't like sleeping with mirrors facing us when we are in bed if we can help it. So, I went to move one of them, which was smack bang in the front of the bed. It was leaning against the door, and when I took the mirror away, the door actually opened ajar a little. That freaked me out. I got my dad and we decided it's better I slept with my mom in another room, and he would take this room with my brother. Again, my dad being dad, he opened the door a little and shouted hello before I told him to shut up. I had a peek inside, but couldn't make out much, only that it was dusty and seemed to be a part of the other half of the house. My dad soon after put a chair and his suitcase on top of it, in front of the door to keep it shut. Fast forward to that night, everyone was sleepy and went ahead to bed. I stayed up a little because I had some emails from work to catch up on and went to work in the living room area. At one point in the night, around 11:30 p.m., I remember there were a few thumps on the roof, sounded like someone's footsteps, then followed by the loudest and most horrendous noise. It sounded like a train was on top of me. It was screeching like steel on steel. It lasted maybe for 30 seconds. I literally froze at that point, didn't know what to do. Thought my dad would come check on me, but no one ever did. I didn't say anything the next morning because I thought I may have imagined it out of tiredness. The following night, same thing again, except I was in bed this time, just got into it, so not asleep yet. It was around the same time that the same exact noise started up again. My mom woke up but was frozen like me. Dad came to check on us and we were all just frozen there listening to this noise, wondering what the hell it was. After it stopped, we were freaked out but managed to shrug it off and went to sleep. Before I fell asleep, I remember hearing some faint thumps that stopped shortly after it started. The next morning we kind of had a meeting of some sorts to discuss this. This is when I told them about the night before. We were extremely unsettled at this point, and luckily it was checkout day. We just got the hell out of there. We never found out what it was. The creepiest thing was, after we packed up and was well away from the place, Dad was driving, but he still looked really disturbed, so I asked him if he was okay. He said, "I am now, but I did not have a good sleep last night." I pressed on and asked him, was it the noise? He said nope, that didn't bother him much compared to another thing he experienced. What bothered him most was when we left for our tour on the second day, he still had his suitcase on top of the chair blocking the door in his room. He just showered, so he also left the towel on the chair to hang. He said when we came back he noticed the door was slightly ajar, the chair had moved slightly, and the towel was on the floor, as if someone tried to push it from the other side, but unsuccessfully after they noticed there was a lot of stuff on the other end. I forced him to ask the host about the noise and the door. She replied that the door was the door to her art room, and the noise was just a possum on the roof. I do not believe her. The noise was not something an animal or even a human can make. My name's Natalia, and I'm a 20-year-old language student from Leicester, currently doing my year abroad in Bordeaux in the South France. I haven't made too many friends here. I'm not too much of a party girl like my big sister, but the friends I have I hold dear to me. I won't bore you too much with the details of my life here, but so far after the first few months nothing too eventful has happened, besides a couple of run-ins with some local troublemakers, but other than that I've had a really nice time. The food here is lovely, the city is beautiful, and the weather is a lot nicer than back home. A couple of weeks ago we took a trip around the south, to my friend Clement's hometown Gone. There are lots of beautiful little villages scattered around this part of the countryside which are very peaceful, calm, and the people are pleasant. This is not an area that tourists typically visit. You find that the locals are often bemused to find a foreign person in this part of the country. Not too far from Gone there is a slightly larger village called Eugenie-les-Bains. I may sound like a broken record here, but this is another very stunning part of the country that probably not many people know about besides the locals. In the town there is a Michelin star restaurant, and we decided to pay a visit here for my boyfriend Brad's birthday, his 23rd to be exact, and as it was now 2 years since we had met, it was nearly our second anniversary too. He had taken time off work to come to France to visit me, and we were glad to be spending some time together again finally. We booked a table for 4 in the restaurant, me, Brad, Clement, and his girlfriend Jeanette. Initially we had wanted to book into the restaurant's hotel as well, however it was too dear for students like us. We booked into an Airbnb instead on the outskirts of town. We enjoyed a lovely meal and then sat outside drinking wine and smoking cigarettes in true French fashion. We then went for a late-night stroll through the town, enjoying the quaint little frog statues situated within the town. After we got too tired, we decided to head back to our Airbnb and rest for the night before we would head off to our next destination. Clement's girlfriend Jeanette was Catholic and always wants to visit Lourdes every year as part of her faith. We eventually made it back to the room and had another glass of wine and a couple more fags before we headed off to bed around 1 a.m. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sound of something scratching by the door or window. I couldn't tell as I had never been here. I wondered if it could have been a dog or perhaps another small animal like a cat maybe. However, the sounds faded away almost as quickly as they appeared, and I quickly drifted back to sleep. Not long after, however, I was awoken again. Not because of any sound from outside this time, but because Brad had gotten up for the bathroom. I lay back down on the pillow and closed my eyes. But then a sudden sense of dread filled me up. I don't know how, but I had a feeling that somebody was watching me. I looked around the room, with only the moonlight bringing in just enough light to see. I looked over to the window, which should have been closed via the shutter, but again, with Brad not being used to the life around here, he had forgotten to lock it. I could see it slowly being pulled open by a hand outside, its silhouette lit by the moonlight, attempting to open the window while holding something that I couldn't quite make out. I then heard what sounded like an old-fashioned camera shutter closing repeatedly. I hadn't heard one of these in many years, not since my grandfather would take family photos of us, but as I've heard this so many times before, it was unmistakable to me what the sound was. What felt like an eternity passed by before I could bring myself to open my mouth and yell out to Brad. The person at the window quickly began to climb down, and whilst briefly in the moonlight, I caught a clear glimpse of a very distinctive ring on the left hand. I didn't get a long look at it, but it did appear to be wooden, with a distinct marking on one side. Seconds later, the assailant was gone. Brad rushed outside to try and see who it was, but all he saw was an empty street and could hear the sound of footsteps becoming more and more distant. We didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night, neither of us dared to. We checked out of the room as early as we could once there was sunlight. Claremont and Jeanette went to get the car while me and Brad returned the keys to the lockbox. I messaged the host about what happened and, whilst he seemed sympathetic, he said he wouldn't be taking any action against what happened. A few days have passed, and we still have no idea who tried to break in. Brad thinks it was the host as they weren't too apologetic, however Clement says it's because they're rich snobs and don't care about foreigners. So we'll likely never figure out who it was. The creepiest thing for me is that some perv has a photo of me lying nude in bed. And I have absolutely no idea who has it and whether or not it might end up online somewhere. So me, my boyfriend, his best friend and his girlfriend drove up to Big Bear Lake. Then a day later another friend of ours drove up and he was supposed to sleep downstairs and couples sleep upstairs since there's only 2 bedrooms. The first night we stayed there was kinda creepy because the cabin was pretty remote and of course there's absolutely no lights outside. It is the woods with coyotes howling and bears. But nonetheless completely normal activity. The next day, around 12 a.m. my boyfriend and I are in bed when suddenly our friend sleeping downstairs comes banging on the door freaking out saying he saw shadows in the woods and that the motion light came on and there was thumping outside. We got a little freaked, but my boyfriend gets out of bed and checked the entire cabin and even goes outside. Nothing. We go up to the other couple's room where there's a porch with sliding glass door that looks out to the woods. It's important to note that I am a naturally very anxious and scared person, while my boyfriend is a rock. He is calm and logical while I tend to jump to the worst scenario. My boyfriend goes over to check the last place in the cabin. At this point, I'm terrified. My boyfriend is 180 pounds CrossFit coach, and to see a big guy like that scared is nauseating. He locked the door and backed away slowly. He quietly says there's a large man standing outside staring at us. He's just standing in the woods looking at us. At this point, I'm thinking he's playing with me. He looks at me and says, "Go lock the door." That's when I knew he was serious. Everyone is freaking out. I run and lock the door behind us, and we all decide to stay in the room to keep an eye out. It's the middle of summer and it's really hot, but we refuse to open a window. I'm so scared, but trying not to show it as everyone else seemed to have calmed down. About 30 minutes go by and nothing happens. I get annoyed with the heat and the fact that there's 5 people in a tiny room and 3 of them are men, so my boyfriend and I go back to our room. I'm still pretty spooked, so my boyfriend tries to cheer me up. At this point, it's about 1:30 a.m. I told him I was too scared to sleep with the lights off. He tells me that's totally fine and he understands, so we just lay with the lights completely on. Finally, I start drifting to sleep when I hear a thud. I sit up and look at my BF. He looks at me. Then the power cuts. I immediately start sobbing. I'm trembling and I can't see anything because it is pitch black. I try to get out of bed and run, but my legs get tangled in the sheets and I fall. My boyfriend picks me up and we grab our phone and run to the other room where everyone else was staying. I'm hysterical at this point. I try to contact our host, but nothing will go through. I try to call my dad, but all of our phones say no service. We are alone out there. Thank God the friend who drove up after us had a different carrier cause his phone had one bar. So he calls the local sheriff. I realize now it's a bit of an overreaction, but at the time we thought we were gonna die. He's on the phone with the sheriff and they transfer us to the utilities company. We give the address and they tell us that we are too far in the woods and they don't cover that area. At this point, we are wondering if the entire area has no power or if the man outside had just cut our power. I cry more and we call 911 to report suspicious activity and a power outage. They send the fire department. A few hours go by, it's 3 a.m. and suddenly the power comes back on. We fall asleep and the next day we talk to some locals of the area. We told them our power went out and he said that was strange and shouldn't have happened. He told us the only reason that happens out here is because of a snowstorm. He said he couldn't explain it. So to the man in the woods who might have cut our power, let's not meet.